Astrology investigates the secret family of Matt Gaetz. I was so excited when I found Maisbel's birth date online. You have no idea, because the whole family around Nestor and Maisbel and Matt, everything's shrouded in secrecy, right? It's just one big question mark around these people. So Nestor's information, in case you haven't noticed, and by the way, you should probably do this for yourself. Go online, go Google Nestor, and try to find his birth information, any of it, city of birth, time of birth. Well, you're not gonna find time of birth, but city of birth, date of birth, right? You're not gonna find his information anywhere. Like, it's been his information has been scrubbed from the internet almost perfectly, which is kind of weird, right? It's kind of very weird. And the other thing is that Maisbel also, her information is practically missing from the internet. We can't find any public records for her at all. And for a long time, nobody was even really sure how old she was. So as these things go, there was apparently a drunk driving. I think she got a citation for drunk driving, but she had a traffic citation in Florida that's been scanned into the system and is now part of public record, and it just happens to have her birth date. So we have her birth information, which gets me very excited, because now, my friends, we can look to see what the connections are between her chart and Matt's. Because at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, people that you're going to have important relationships with in your lifetime are going to have strong connections between your chart and theirs. And those connections should also tell you a lot about how this relationship is going to play out, and also what evolutionary lessons need to be learned as part of this relationship. So if Matt and Maisbel had a relationship above and beyond casual dating, which apparently they did, because they've known each other for 20 years now, and were dating for the better part of 15, I think. And his parents gave her a brand new Mercedes-Benz, congratulating her on the last 15 years. That's pretty significant. And listen, I don't know about you, but I don't have any ex-boyfriends. I don't even have any girlfriends that have ex-boyfriends that have families that drop brand new cars on them. Listen, if anybody wants to sign up and make me part of that program, I will be happy to receive a car from their parents. In any event, his parents dropping a car on her was a little suspect, and raised everybody's ears, like, wait, what's going on here? Because it's a little odd. So you can't hide this stuff forever. The truth eventually comes out, because people get tired of trying to keep up a charade or a charade, and that is pretty much what's happening right now. Okay, so with that said, I was very excited. I got home, I set these charts up, and I was like, ooh, good, going to get the dirt, going to get the dirt. And then as soon as I started really getting into the chart, my excitement turned to stomach churning, because there are some very unsavory possibilities showing up with these charts. Yeah, and we're going to get into some of this, but before I get into the charts, I just have a couple of things that we do need to talk about as a result of looking at these charts and the particular situation we're finding ourselves in, which is basically a man who has, out of the clear blue sky, decided to adopt a nearly grown teenage boy who is supposedly the brother of the girl he used to date, who gets cars dropped on her by his parents for unknown reasons. Now, there's been a lot of speculation about Nestor, and there's been, initially the speculation was that Nestor was Matt Gaetz' young boy toy lover, which doesn't set well with the LGBTQIA XYZ community, because gay men don't need to adopt their boyfriends. And there have been plenty of senators, typically Christian and Republican, by the way, that have gotten caught with their little boy toys, and have tried to pass them off as the hired help, because, helping me with my luggage because I've got back problems. Yeah, that's it. Even Falwell Jr. and the houseboy and the wife and the threesome and the gay bathhouse that he owned and was, wow. So the thing about it is, you don't need to go through all this rigmarole to pretend you're adopting somebody, because that just raises all kinds of suspicions, right? So later, somebody pointed out, and this makes a lot more sense, what if Nestor is actually Matt Gaetz' biological son. And if that's the case, that means that Maisbel might very well be Nestor's actual mother, and he's just been raised to believe that that's his sister. And there's reasons for that too, which we're going to get into. Okay, so with all of that said, here's what we got to talk about before we start. One, as entertaining as it is to look at all of the unsavory possibilities in a group of charts or for an individual, listen folks, when there are children involved, there's more than one person who's impacted by this speculation, even if we're talking about adult children. As astrologers, or just generally speaking decent human beings, we should always keep this in the forefront of our mind and our speech when we're making public speculation about, really unsavory or questionable issues that are coming up. Because it's not just the individual anymore, now it's their children that are being impacted by this as well. So, with that said, while Matt Gaetz deserves everything he gets thrown at him, and probably more, in my opinion, the fact of the matter is that he's very likely the actual biological father of Nestor. And if this is a possibility, we should be mindful that Nestor will publicly suffer for his father's sins too. So we don't need to pile on here. 2, always remember, this is the most important thing you're ever going to know if you're going to go into any type of counseling at any level, especially with astrology. Context is everything. Let me repeat that for you. Context is everything. While it's very easy to pass judgment on people when we don't know anything about their environment or the circumstances that have led to their behaviors or choices, listen, after all, is a man who steals to feed his children the same moral offense as an employer who cheats his employees out of their fair wages, or even giving back to the community without fair taxation for his income? Are these really the same level of crimes? Which one is the worst moral offense? And again, it depends on the context, right? So with context, it's obvious which one's the problem. So remember, when you're dealing with some questionable stuff or some questionable choices that people are making, or questionable personalities, in situations, the thing to remember is that moral turpitude is only simple if you're a simpleton. Context is everything. And finally, 3, anyone can have human trash for parents. Listen, we get the family we're born into. We don't get a choice in the matter. What we can do is remember that at any moment in time, someone can rise above the circumstances of their birth, their environment, or the low expectations of the people around them, and become extraordinarily decent human beings, or heroes, if the situation arises. The monsters in life are not people who fall from grace or make mistakes or struggle with parenting. The real monsters are the ones you and I create when we turn a blind eye and make excuses for them, because in every other way, they look like the image of worldly success that we wish we could be. Those are the monsters, not the people who make mistakes. All right, so this is Nestor Galban, and this is a very Neptunian type of scenario because we're told that he was born in 2001 in Havana, Cuba, and that's a big maybe because sometimes we have got references that say he was born in 2000. I think he was born in 2000. All the other birth information has been wiped clean from the internet and public record, and it's unknown at this time. This kid literally is practically invisible. The CIA should have such, maybe the CIA is responsible for this, but like literally you'd think he was a CIA operative. He's so missing from any kind of footprint on the internet. Now, according to the story that we're given, Nestor emigrated to the United States in 2013 at 12 years old. Well, supposedly 12 years old. His, air quotes, sister, Maisbel, was already in the United States studying, and we believe she was in college and living with Matt when Nestor arrived in 2013. She was definitely living with Matt. I think she was in college. Now, in 2016, Maisbel sued for custody of her, air quotes, brother from his grandfather and won custody. Matt was her lawyer during this. Now, why she would want custody of her little brother at this late stage in the game, when there's nothing wrong with her dad, is beyond us. We also know that in 2013, about the time that Nestor emigrated to the United States, or immigrated, Nestor's grandmother, who was raising, oh, I'm sorry, his mother, not his grandmother, his mother, air quotes, who was raising him, had died of breast cancer. Now, Maisbel apparently broke up with Matt shortly after Nestor arrived. So she moved out, but Nestor stayed at Matt's house, right? And for more information and details about all of this, like in a much more chronological order, there's a link at Reddit right here, and I'll put it in the description box below. So some of the things that we do know that Nestor was born a few days before June 18th, thanks to a random tweet from Matt. And Matt says he's born in 2001, but honestly, Matt lies from both sides of his mouth on his best days. So I did a little bit of calculations and examination, and I personally believe that Nestor was born in 2000, not 2001. And I don't know why a year would make a difference in this particular scenario. And it could just be that Matt's confused, because Matt is just Matt. But so I'm going with 2000, and at the end of the day, we don't know, because there's no way to corroborate any of this, because Nestor is apparently invisible on the internet. So the question now is, what are the chances that Maisbel Mendez and Matt Gaetz were involved and had a child together? I say they were pretty damn good, actually, and here's why. So again, remember, if there's going to be a real meaningful involvement in somebody's life, there has to be cross connection between the chart. We don't get involved with people we don't feel connected to, and we certainly don't stay involved with people we don't feel connected to. So we took the two charts and we said, well, do we have any connections between the chart? Holy cow, do we ever? Look at this. So Maisbel carries the Sun opposed Pluto, okay, in her chart. Now, the Sun opposed Pluto is a pretty intense combination. She's a very strong-willed young lady, very strong-willed. And also, too, with the Sun opposed Pluto, the men that she's going to attract in her life will tend to run very heavy-handed and or be extremely manipulative, or be very drawn to power and the use and attainment of power, right? So this could easily describe her father, as well as it could describe Matt and anybody else who gets involved. She will not get involved with, lovey-dovey, lightweight guys. She's attracted to the bad boys. Or, she'll become a powerhouse on her own. Depends on whether she embraces this about herself or she projects it onto somebody else. Now, here's the thing, though. What does the Sun-Pluto do in her chart? Well, it conjuncts his Sun-Moon opposition. So one of the things I want you guys to know when you're looking at this is that this whole list here is in coordination with his chart. So everything that you see here is going to be lined up with something over here. That's the only thing we have here in these two columns. Okay, and if you look, like, holy cow, that's a lot of stuff, right? They're connected. They're so connected. So this Sun-Pluto opposition is right dead on top of his full moon. Okay, so in a synastry chart, what this typically means that this is somebody who's going to come into your life that's definitely going to turn your life upside down. And this is her turning his life upside down. If she is in fact the mother of his child, then she absolutely is turning his life upside down, because he's been doing his thing like nothing's ever happened for all this time, but that's all coming to an end very quickly. Okay, now the other thing is she's got Moon, Mercury, and Jupiter in Gemini. She's just as mercurial as he is. However, the thing you want to see right here is that Mercury in Gemini, that Jupiter-Mercury conjunction. So her Jupiter conjuncts his Mercury. With Jupiter aspects, anytime you have Jupiter on top of somebody else's planet, you're usually beneficiently disposed to them and will give them a lot more leeway than anybody else would get from you, right? You'll be a lot more generously disposed to them than you would be to other people. This can be good, this can be bad. It's a very forgiving aspect. Jupiter, bless Jupiter, is a very forgiving aspect. But if you have somebody who is more inclined to take advantage of your generosity and see it as a weakness rather than an asset, then it's problematic for the Jupiter person because they're frequently getting taken advantage of. With this character and its Mercury in Gemini, it's not unthinkable that he absolutely would take advantage of that Jupiter and Gemini's trust and optimism in him. Now, she also carries Mars and Chiron together. They're conjunct in Cancer. And in her chart, it's opposing Uranus and Capricorn. So men are a problem in her life. It's right there. The men in her life are problematic. There's a couple of things happening with this. One, the men in her life are going to be problematic. She's going to attract wounded men or crazy people, right? Because she's, for whatever reason in this lifetime, she's got a very specific karma. So she's going to pull in very unruly, unmanageable men. The other thing is with this particular configuration, it could either be childbirth is an issue, so childbirth is going to be problematic for her, or there is the possibility of some type of trauma, sexual trauma in life, which we're not going to get into in this very second. Anyway, so all of that right here, now guess what? You know what that does? Look at this. It sets up a grand cross to his Venus-Mars. He's got Venus in Aries. He's got Mars in Libra, right? And together, they set up a grand cross with each other. So, and remember, when we did Gaetz and Greenberg, Matt seems to attract people that he's got these grand cross configurations with. Like, he really pulls it in. So Matt's really on the ropes in this lifetime about getting his act together. And he is failing magnificently, by the way. But, you know, he's not dead yet, so there's still a chance he can redeem himself. But she's definitely a part of this, this overwhelming push to, like, literally get him to the edge and force him to make a decision about which direction he's going to go in this lifetime. So she's absolutely part of that. So I thought that was interesting that this grand cross configuration showed up in her chart as well as it did with Greenberg. Now she has Venus in Taurus, and look at that. It's right there on his Chiron. So that Venus and Chiron across the charts, she is, or he is, there's an issue here with values and money that's going to come up time and time again. And the problem is with this particular aspect, with Venus and Chiron together like this, there is the chance, because she's very security conscious, she's very materially driven, as it were. And it's not just because of the Venus and Taurus. She's got all this Gemini too. So Gemini-Taurus combinations like this are very materialistic because they're superficial. You know, they're just, I don't mean to offend anybody, but it's just, everybody's got different reward systems they're driven by. And with this particular combination right here, especially for her, and with that Sun Pluto opposition, she is all about material rewards. So she's very easily motivated. She's very easily motivated by shiny coins, as it were. Now, the problem, of course, is that with his Chiron and Taurus, you know, she may be hanging out, Venus and Taurus here, on top of that Chiron. She may be hanging out waiting for the big payday or the payoff, but that Chiron and Taurus is not going to be able to deliver it. So she may get shorted in the end before this is over. Now, she carries Saturn and Capricorn. She's got a whole thing in this lifetime she's got to sort out and work on her own. And with him, look at that, it squares his Saturn in Libra. So they've got a Saturn square. They're working through some really difficult Saturnine or karmic responsibilities to each other and obligations in this lifetime. When you get involved with people who have heavy Saturn aspects between the charts, whether they're conjunctions, trines, squares, whatever it is, if it's a Saturn aspect, you can expect this relationship to have a lot more weight and, what is it, gravitas, gravity in your life, and also come with, you know, a tremendous sense of responsibility. Whether you embrace it or not is another question, or another series of questions entirely, but ultimately you can't avoid being responsible or obligated to each other at some level once you've made that connection. Her nodes are in Pisces, Virgo. They are squaring his Uranus and Sagittarius. I'm not really worried about that. That's kind of a, compared to everything else in the chart, those are minor aspects. Her Neptune is, I don't know why I even put that there. Ignore this. Sorry. He has Mars, Chiron, and Cancer. You know what? That's a typo. I'm so sorry. That's her Mars, Chiron, and Cancer. What was I thinking? Oh, just ignore that. Sorry. And her Venus in Taurus is where we believe his nadir is, or his imium coeli. But this is based on rectified time, so I would not put too much stock in that, because I think we're about if that is the case, we're about 2 degrees off. And Venus with the 4th house typically means that Venus makes the 4th house person's home very beautiful and soft and inviting. So her living with Matt, she would have actually turned his house into a home. And given what we know about his temperament and personality, I do not see, you know, douchebag frat boy having a whole lot of taste or sense of hominess when it comes to his home or his domicile. So I imagine he had quite the bachelor pad or frat house, more likely, until she moved in. She probably turned it into a beautiful home. But, you know, we don't know, because we don't see those pictures. Not in Better Homes and Gardens anyway. All right, so I wanted to put this here so you guys could kind of see it in a wheel. Now this is a bi-wheel. His chart is in the middle, hers is on the outside. And look at all this. So these are all her Gemini planets, right? And there's that Jupiter-Mercury conjunction between the charts. So let's see, let me use this color. All right, so here, there's her Sun Pluto on his full moon, right? Her Jupiter's on his Mercury. Where's that Mars Chiron of hers? Here's her Mars Chiron in Cancer, and it is down here with his, oh no, it's a T-square, right? There's his Venus, there's his Mars. Look at that. Let me use a different color for this, sorry. Let's use red. And remember too, Greenberg also, there was a strong aspect with Matt's Venus and Mars. So there's a running theme that's involving these people, which is kind of interesting. I don't know what it is. We'll find out soon enough, but it is certainly there. And they have a Saturn square. So here's his Saturn, here's hers, and there's the square. So I mean, you can see already, like we're stacking up a lot of different aspects here. So I just want to give you guys a visual for that. Now, if this is, because remember, we're working with a guesstimated time for him. We think he is early Scorpio rising. We think. If he is, in fact, early Scorpio rising, like I think he is, that's going to put all of her planets in his chart this way. So the most important thing is that this Sun-Pluto opposition that sits on his full moon is through that 1st and 7th house. So this would represent a couple of things possibly. It could possibly show as her being a huge impediment and an obstacle to him getting married to somebody else, because Pluto likes to obstruct. Pluto can be, it's not always, but it certainly can be the planet of constipation, meaning that nothing will pass through it or around it. You got to wait for it to get out of the way. So that Sun Pluto on his full moon, she could, if this is the correct chart and I've got the correct rectified time of birth for him, she could have literally been in his life in the form of an obstacle or impediment from him getting married to anybody, you know, which is kind of interesting. What it also means too is that there is a real possibility that marrying him may be something that is absolutely on her list of things to do before she dies. So there is that as well. And with a Sun-Pluto opposition, with Sun-Pluto characters, man, when they want it, they're going to get it. And they don't care if they have to wait your entire life to get what they want from you. They'll get it. So there's that. I thought that was interesting. Now, she is loading up, with this rectified time, she is loading up his 7th and 8th house. Okay, and all this Gemini sitting in that eighth house, she knows his secrets. One of the things that he absolutely does not want, if we have the correct time of birth, is her getting subpoenaed, because she literally knows where all the bodies were. She's got some dirt on him like nobody's business. The only saving grace she's got, or he's got, I should say, is that her Jupiter, her Jupiter's on his Mercury, because again, remember the Jupiter individual is beneficently disposed to the other person, so she would be very protective of him for the most part, as long as it served her purpose. But like, she would be more generously disposed and protective of him than she would anybody else. So he'd better hope and pray she doesn't get subpoenaed. And that maybe, I don't know how that works. I mean, maybe you can't testify against your husband. Maybe that's what all this marriage thing that we're seeing coming up in November is. I don't know how that works. So if you know better, let me know. So there's that. And where else? So her planets are in red. And okay, so here, that was what I was looking at. So this Mars Uranus, I thought this was interesting. So this Mars Chiron opposing Uranus, because you know she does attract the unruly ones, just these unmanageable men. So the Mars Chiron opposing Uranus is going to come across our 3rd and 9th house. So not completely sure what to do with this. What I can say is that typically with Uranus in the 3rd, there's always a bit of a shock or surprise that comes with it. With Mars-Uranus opposition, you know, the challenges are that Mars-Uranus opposition by itself, she is also a little wackadoodle herself. She's a little unruly and unmanageable herself, which is probably why she attracts these kinds of men. Talk about living dangerously, right? Guys who like to live dangerously, date crazy women. But also too, with coming out of 3rd and 9th house, again, it's all about information. She knows where the bodies are. She probably knows stuff he doesn't even realize she knows. Because she would be, with a Sun-Pluto opposition, man, she's a hell of a snoop. So she's gone through his stuff in his record. She's got all kinds of dirt on him he doesn't know about. She's been snooping and sneaking, because that is their nature. With Mars Chiron opposing Uranus like this coming out of 3rd and 9th, this may also involve legal stuff. So I would be curious to know exactly what she does know. So that is kind of interesting, eh? Yeah. Now, what's interesting about this chart, if we have his correct time of birth and also the way her chart is set up, if you look, right, all of her planets are very, very concentrated, you know, in very specific areas of life. So we have it in the 1st, the 3rd, the 7th, the 8th, and the 9th. So the way that she impacts him is absolutely going to be through his identity. And with Pluto there, she's got a huge life-changing impact on his identity, right? Transformative. And with Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn in the 3rd, this gets a little weird because these are transpersonal planets, but Saturn in the 3rd, right here, I just want to point this out. Saturn in the 3rd, remember, Saturn is about commitments and obligations, and Saturn will hold you to your word. So her Saturn in his 3rd house, she will absolutely hold him to his word, whether he likes it or not. And with this Mars Chiron opposing Uranus, she would also know exactly where to hurt him or to upset him. Like, she knows how to push his buttons. So if you want to see Matt Gaetz really get on the crazy train, let her go at him for a couple of minutes. With her Sun and Venus here in the 7th house and involving his Chiron and his Sun and that full moon in the chart, right? So again, relationships being an impediment to him getting married to other people. Very, very deep, heavy karmic ties, and certainly obligations to each other that would be impossible to get out of if they became, what is the word, entangled. Now, all this 8th house stuff around that Mercury, all I'm going to say is that she knows where all the bodies are buried and probably knows a lot more than she's letting on. So she is his. If he thought Joel Greenberg was a problem, honey, Joel is an amateur compared to this one. She's got it in spades. She is literally more dangerous to him than, you know, any combination of mafia groups across the world. She is definitely he needs her on his side. Let's just put it that way. So who is this little Plutonian super sleuth that's got Matt Gaetz by the short hairs and he doesn't even know it yet? Well, this is May. Now, we don't have a time of birth for her, so ignore the houses because we don't actually have any, right? So here's what we do know. The first thing is we know she's a Taurus with Venus in Taurus. Venus in Taurus is a very good position to have because Venus likes being in Taurus. It's the sign of its rulership. And it makes, especially for women, it makes them much more sensual and attractive. And there's that oomph about them that men can't resist, or other women, depending on your inclination. But it heightens the sensuality of the individual significantly. With this Sun in Taurus, her Sun in Taurus trines Saturn and Neptune, which are conjunct. So she has a tremendous power of visualization and imagination. So she's not such a stick in the mud, but she definitely has grand dreams and grand plans about who she's going to be in this lifetime. And the most important thing, because this trine, she has the wherewithal to make those things happen. So once she commits herself to a vision or a dream of what her life should look like, she's very well equipped to see it through to completion, which is a great thing to have if you want to accomplish grand dreams. Now, here's where she and Matt are a lot alike. She has the moon in Gemini, Mercury in Gemini, and Matt is Mercury in Gemini as well, and Jupiter in Gemini. She is more Gemini than Matt is. So with all this Gemini, she's a challenge. With all this Gemini, she's very light and fleet-footed mentally. So she will change her mind on a dime. She will frequently entertain 5 and 6 and 7 different options all at the same time. Commitment is not a strong point for her unless it serves her purposes. So remember, she has it within her to keep her commitments, but listen, unless it is something that she has come up with on her own that serves her, she's not committed to anything. She just literally does not have time for that. I don't have time for that. And with all of this Gemini, she does not like being trapped, and she does not like being bored, and she doesn't like being held still. So holding her in captivity is a bad thing, right? She likes her freedom, and she likes being able to come and go as she pleases and do what she needs to do. As a parent, this means that she's more likely to deal with her children as if they were siblings or friends than the whole top-down parenting sort of thing. So, there are two types of parenting styles. There's the parenting style where you're the authoritarian parent figure. And then there's the other one where your kids are your friends, and as they grow older, they tend to see you more as a sibling and a friend rather than a parent, because it's that kind of a casual, comfortable relationship. And this is the kind of relationship she would have with her own children, assuming that Nestor is not her kid. Again, we've got Mars Chiron opposing Uranus, and unfortunately, we really don't know what houses this is falling in. And with a Mars Chiron Uranus composition like this, I am concerned. I'm genuinely concerned that there is some type of sexual trauma that occurred when she was very, very young, or domestic abuse, right? So there's something there that created a very destabilizing, unmanageable environment for a young person that caused tremendous scarring and trauma. Of course, I could be completely wrong. I could be completely wrong. If you ask her, she could probably say that nothing untoward happened, everything was fine. These things could happen. Now, only the person knows for sure, and it's not our job to pry and pull until they tell us what we want to hear. So if she says nothing happened, then nothing happened, and we just leave it at that. All right, now here's what's interesting. So remember that Sun-Pluto conjunction opposition we were looking at, that powerful Sun-Pluto opposition? Well, look at this. It is supported by that Saturn, Neptune, and Capricorn. So the thing about, remember I was saying she has the ability to and the wherewithal to stick with it until she achieves whatever her grand plans are, right? With this configuration, with Sun, Pluto, Saturn, and Neptune, she has literally the ability to achieve monumental things compared to what she started working with, and really make things happen. It will be very interesting to see what she does with her life. She has a tremendous amount of potential to realize her dreams. The question, of course, becomes what are her dreams, right? So we'll see. We'll see. One of the challenges with her chart, though, I'll tell you, see this Jupiter? This Jupiter sets up a quincunx, or what they call a yod, right, to Pluto and Saturn and Neptune. So when you have a yod formation, right, which kind of looks like that. So it's two quincunxes, planet A, planet B, planet C, and then a sextile between the bottom two. Typically what happens is, and inconjuncts are really hard to work with, typically what happens is it's a point of irritation because you can never quite get it right. So it's like the world's worst catch-22. That's the best way to describe it. It is the world's worst catch-22. So with Maisbel, let's do this here. With Jupiter as the apex of this yod involving Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto, the catch-22 for her, the perpetual catch-22 for her, may have everything to do with legalities, right? So it's going to be legalities, rules, bureaucracies. Pluto's in Scorpio. Pluto, just Pluto by itself. Power plays, all sort of stuff, and also with Jupiter, ethics, right? So I'm not completely sure how this is going to play out in her life, or how it has played out in her life so far, because obviously we don't know. We can't find any information on her anywhere, or Nestor. But with Jupiter in a yod formation with Saturn, Neptune, and Pluto, this typically indicates that the giant catch-22 has a lot to do with bigger picture stuff. So the law, ethics, communities, bureaucracies, ambiguities, things that are hard to pin down, and also power brokers, the underworld, as it were. All of these things create problems for her in terms of getting what she wants. So in this lifetime, she is going to forever come close to whatever the reward is she's looking for, and it's going to get snatched away from her at the last minute, or it's going to be a huge disappointment because it's not going to be what she was trying to do. So she'll always come in short of what she wants. And I know we just talked about how this Pluto and the Saturn, Neptune, and the stuff, and how this is going to create this ability to get her really close to these phenomenal dreams. And she can and she will. But, catch-22s are, we're going to give you this, but you're also going to get that at the same time, right? So it's never a nice, clean, easy win, and especially for her. So, but we'll see. We'll see how this plays out. Now, here's where it gets kind of icky with this whole situation, right? So one of the things that we know is that if Nestor is in fact Matt Gaetz' biological son, that means that Matt had Nestor when he was 19 years old. And that also means that depending on whether Nestor was born in 2000 or 2001, that means that if Maisbel is actually Nestor's mother, that means that she was pregnant and gave birth when she was 12 or 13. Yeah. So there is the possibility that Matt was 19 years old and impregnated a 12 or 13-year-old girl, and she gave birth to a little boy named Nestor, who was raised like he was her brother by her parents, or Nestor's grandparents, which makes all kinds of sense now why nobody can find anybody's information about the date of birth, where they were born. Like, the only reason Maisbel's information comes up is because of a traffic citation somebody unearthed from public record. So, this of course led me to ask, like, okay, so hang on a second. So what is the legal age of consent in Cuba, right? And is that why he's like scrubbing? I mean, certainly if I impregnated a pre-adolescent girl, I'd be scrubbing the information off the internet if I could too. But is that what this is about? And so all this led me down the path of trying to figure out what it is. So apparently There's a couple, and you can look it up for yourself. There are a couple of things to understand. One, there's a thing called the legal age of consent, and then there is the tolerated age of consent. And typically, there's a huge difference between the two the more impoverished the area is. So the more poor a region is, the more likely the legal age of consent is higher than the tolerated age of consent, which is typically much lower. And this is why we have so much child sex trafficking in poor countries. The whole like pedophile sex tourism is always to poor third world countries and second world countries, because where you have poverty and misogyny, meaning that women aren't worth anything, so baby girls certainly aren't worth anything either, right? What you have is this whole culture that's built on, believe what I say, oh, the legal age of consent is 16, 18, 21, but ignore what I do. Well, but like the tolerated age of consent, around here is 10, 11, 12. So apparently in Cuba, because Cuba is a very poor country and it's a very, very misogynistic, which, listen, let's be fair, it's not just them. Misogyny is a global problem. It's just that they're much more poor than some of these other countries. With that said, there's absolutely known, just like in other countries where there's a great or a significant rate of poverty, there's a known subculture that basically is prostituting little girls to rich and wealthy European and American men, and I guess other nations too. But men who are looking for very young, very underage girls are not doing it in the United States. Sorry, folks, there is no human trafficking in the United States. It's not happening. Anybody who's got that kind of money has the money to go to places like Mexico or Cuba or Russia or, Thailand or Vietnam or Cambodia. Like, pick your country that is desperately poor, and I guarantee you can find disgusting pedophiles looking for little kids and getting them cheap. Duh. Sorry. So this is what came up when I was looking at the legal age of consent in Cuba. There's a link. I'll put a link down in the description box. You can read an article about that and sex tourism with minors in Cuba. But all of this is to say is that if this is a tolerated age of consent, literally old enough to bleed, old enough to breed, then it is not unthinkable that a 19-year-old American male who comes from a family with lots of money and lots of power and influence in Cuba could have access to many 12-year-old girls. And with her chart, it's not unthinkable that she was very precocious at a very young age. Okay, so let's look at Maisbel's chart again and understand that now we're getting into some weird territory here, right? Depending on your cultural upbringing. So the first thing is with the Saturn-Pluto opposition right here. And it's not, please don't take this as a rule for every single person as a Sun-Pluto opposition, but I will say that with a Sun-Pluto opposition in her particular chart, especially with all this Gemini, right, there is the very distinct possibility that she would have matured and become very curious about sex and relationships and power dynamics in relationships and all that sort of stuff at a very young age. So she would have been, rather than a late bloomer, she would have been an early bloomer. Now, this does not mean that it is acceptable for grown men to pursue little girls or little boys or anybody that's well below your developmental age. Not okay. But this is to say that there is the distinct possibility that she would have been very precocious or certainly very curious about these things and would have been an early bloomer, right? And this could be a problem. This could definitely be a problem, especially in a society or a culture or a geographical area. I mean, maybe she's like out in the Appalachians and it's happening, right? Where you have an entire group of men of various ages who are invested in making excuses for themselves. So they will say things like, well, she pursued me, she brought it on herself, she's this sort of thing going on, right? Now with Mars and Chiron, opposing Uranus like this, also too, this is going to make her very experimental and very curious in a clinical way. So for people who don't understand what's happening, like they would see these things expressed in a pre-adolescent boy or girl, and they might want to interpret this as the child being very hypersexual, which is not true at all. It's natural for people to have curiosity about their bodies. It's natural for people to be curious about relationships and how to navigate power dynamics in a relationship. It's not unusual for young people until they're well past their 20s to want to see what makes them attractive to other people. How do I increase my value to the viewer, right? How do I make myself more appealing to an audience? How do I increase my social power by being more attractive to other people, right? These are all normal developmental things. Some people are early bloomers, some people are late bloomers, but in all ways, in all days, for all people, this is not the same thing as being sexually developed. So let's talk about that before we finish this. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard this expression, especially when it comes to young girls, right? You know, oh, that child is just too fast, or she's too grown, or, you know, she looks like an adult. How was I supposed to know? Or, you know, the best one is like, you know, oh, well, you know, girls mature faster than boys. Or sometimes you'll even hear some of these guys, like grown men say things like, oh, well, you know, she pursued me, you know, or she asked for it. And in all of these things, what they're trying to say is, it's not my fault, which is not true, right? Because all you need to do is spend 30 seconds listening to them talk, literally listen to them talk, and it becomes obvious exactly how old the person you're dealing with is. There are levels of development that you're not going to be able to pretend or fake. It's impossible. This is why you don't have entire like legions of middle-aged women and old women chasing down adolescent boys, because no matter how grown that boy is, all he's got to do is open his mouth, and we know in the first 2 minutes, oh no, oh no, 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 you are not nearly grown enough for this, because no. All he's got to do is talk, and all you have to do is listen. So I suppose the difference is whether men are listening or not, right? Or if they're listening and just choosing to ignore what they're hearing, which are all big red flags. This is clearly not somebody who has developed or matured as they appear. All right, so there's that. Now this picture, for those of you who are too young to know this, this is Madonna. Well, not Madonna, but this is from the Madonna days back in the 80s. So Madonna really became she was such an agent provocateur. So she really built her reputation or her brand on this whole shocking, it's not shocking now, but back in the day it was, this whole shocking, like wearing your underwear on the outside, this whole lingerie as fashion sort of thing. Now, the reason I put these pictures here is because a lot of Madonna's fans were preteens. These were little girls between the ages of 10 and 14. So, and I couldn't find any pictures on the internet of these girls out at concerts, but the girls used to dress like this to go to her concerts. So the thing about it is, when you have a little girl dressed like this, right, clearly this is very sexually provocative grown woman wear, right? And you're in theory flashing and advertising that you're a grown woman and you're ready for the hubba hubba, right? But any fool in their right mind knows, A, she looks like a little girl, and B, even if she doesn't look like a little girl because you aren't really looking at her face, all you got to do is talk to her. Literally, all you got to do is talk to her, and you'll know in less than 2 minutes that you're dealing with a little girl. So the thing about it is, all people at these ages want attention. All people at these ages want validation, and they want to know that they're attractive. They don't know what being sexually desirable is because they're not there yet. They haven't sexually developed and matured enough to appreciate what that actually means, right? I mean, listen, babies, their taste buds develop over time, and you can give a baby like this really expensive caviar. It doesn't mean anything to the baby. It just tastes gross because their taste buds haven't matured enough to understand what it is that you're giving them. So babies don't care that it costs $300 an ounce, right? So it's kind of the same thing when it comes to sex and teenagers. They're not developed enough psychologically or emotionally to understand all of the more sophisticated aspects of human intimacy because they're not there yet. So the only thing that's happening, if you are one of those horrible people that's trying to engage with a child, all they understand that there is the mechanical things involved, and that has no value to them because that's not really what this is about. Well, except maybe you. So when we talk about girls, especially young girls, like and in this case with Maisbel, she was, if big if she was in fact 12 or 13 years old when this 19-year-old Matt Gaetz laid down with her and made a baby, at the end of the day, she was still 12 or 13 years old. She was a child. So we can talk about how she was precocious and, maybe she was too fast or too grown or, very curious and, whatever, and went out and chasing this down, pursuing it. Because there's always that one that's always like, well, when I was that age, I was looking for it. Well, listen, hot pants, we're really happy for you. But for the rest of us that have had to deal with creepy old men, no, this is not the way it works for normal people. You're the exception. We're the rule. So when we think about Maisbel, let's try not to be too hard on her. If this was a situation where she was the provocateur of this situation that led to a pregnancy, or if she went out and deliberately got pregnant on him, because at 12 she thought she was in love with him. So I just wanted to point that out, because this is an issue and this is a conversation we need to have, especially when we're talking about this stuff, because it's so easy to villainize the girls, or the little boys if they're gay, for bringing this on themselves, when the reality is, when you are the only adult in the room, as these things go, you, my friend, have the responsibility to be the adult. And that means that you have to make the hard decisions that protect them from themselves and maybe even protect them from you. I don't know why it's such a difficult thing for some people to remember that they are the adult in the room, not the teenager, right? And especially with young kids and especially with adolescent girls, like you only have to talk for 2 seconds. You're dealing with a child. And that means that you are the only adult in the room. So why is it so hard to be a responsible adult? Except maybe that when it comes right down to it, all of this is about character. So ultimately, the measure of your character is how you respond to situations when nobody that you think matters to you is going to be watching you. Sorry, I know, there's just a whole lot of like ick and squick factor, and I know it must sound like I'm preaching to folks, but these are things that we need to talk about at some point, and some people really do need the reminders. So there's that. Okay, so back to the astrology. Here are the dates that we're going to watch for with these two together. If I have the right time of birth for him, and I'm pretty sure we've got the right birth date for her thanks to public records. Now, we do know that on June 18th, Matt announced Nestor as his son by tweeting it. Now, at that time, May had her Mars Chiron opposing Uranus being activated, and Matt had his Mars being activated, exactly, because there was an eclipse at 0 Cancer happening that pulled in both of this for both of them. So both of them had their Mars pulled in with this eclipse at 0 degrees Cancer that occurred around the 18th. Now, moving forward in time, on August 19th, which is coming up almost immediately, right? We've got a Uranus station at 14 Taurus. Now, what that means is with Matt, it's going to hit that Sun-Moon opposition in his 1st and 7th house if we have the right time of birth. It's a Sun-Moon opposition no matter what. It's the full moon is getting hammered by this Uranus station, but which houses it falls in depends on what the actual time of birth is. So if I'm correct and it's early Scorpio rising, then the full moon, he's getting Uranus station right across that 1st, 7th house. So revelations may be afoot as far as his actual relationships with people, because Uranus is a big old truth bomb. Boom! There you go. Now, with her, this is going to affect her Sun-Pluto opposition, which pulls in his full moon. So these two, whatever happens with this Uranus station, these two are getting it simultaneously, right? So it will be interesting to see what happens. So remember this date around August 19th, give or take a day. Now, after that, on October 6th, there's going to be a new moon at 13 Libra, and Pluto is going to station direct at 24 Capricorn. Now, she doesn't receive this. This is specific to him and only him. So this is his stuff. We're not sure what that's about. So I just put it there so I have it to remember by. Now, as we get down into the month, after this happens, then we end up here, right? So on October 19th, May gets her Jupiter activated. So something good is going to fall into May's lap around October 19th. She's getting some type of protection or blessing or reward around the 19th. And immediately after that, it will also pull in her Venus. So she's getting something really good around this time, the 19th and 20th of October. Now, there's a full moon at this time, around the 19th and 20th. But the more important thing that I'm looking at is that there's a Jupiter stationing direct at 22 Aquarius that's going to pull in Matt's Chiron. So, and it's going to be a square. So that Jupiter stationed direct squaring Matt's Chiron could mean that there is some type of break. There's some type of break or breaking of an impasse for him. Whatever's going on, she's getting a lot of benefit from this, and he is making some sacrifices. And then, of course, as we get down into December, and again, this is specifically and only for Matt, Venus will station retrograde at 26 Capricorn, and it will square his Pluto. So his finances and his relationships are going to come under fire and may prove to be a giant Achilles heel for him. So naturally, I went back and looked for the tweet that went out to the world announcing Nestor as his quasi-adopted son. And that occurred on June 18th. So I looked at the dates for June 18th and planetary patterns, because remember, there was this eclipse that was occurring, right, that involved Matt's Mars and Maisbel's Mars Chiron. So we knew about that. Well, June 18th occurred 3 days before, it's under the umbrella of the eclipse, 3 days before that 0 degrees Cancer eclipse. So what was happening? Well, look at this, baby. Mercury stationed retrograde at 14 Cancer, and 14 Cancer is a very it's a very important fixed star because it really illuminates or makes famous something, right, or has potential to. Now, this particular Mercury station retrograde, and it opposed Maisbel Saturn, and it squared Matt Saturn. Remember, Saturn is about obligations and commitments. So with this heavy Saturn activation with that Mercury station retrograde under that 0 Cancer eclipse, something involving men or young men, that's Mars, right, and obligations, commitments, and karmic debts absolutely came into play at this time. I would bet you good money that Mr. Matt here suddenly owned up to Nestor because Maisbel pushed the issue. I'm going to bet you good money Miss Maisbel with that Sun-Pluto opposition forced his hand and forced our little, frat boy here to claim his son. Betcha. So the last part of this is that this really led me to speculate, like, okay, so we literally, I'm not kidding, we literally cannot find Nestor's birth information anywhere online. Nothing, not a zip. The man's a ghost. So, I'm like, okay, well, there's a random tweet where Matt says before June 18th that Nestor's birthday was just a few days before then, right? And we know that Matt is saying that Nestor was born in 2001, but we also know Matt lies through his teeth. So we've narrowed it down to June 2000 or 2001. So now the question becomes, if we set up charts for just a couple of days before the 18th, would we see anything involving the date of June 18th, 2020? Because remember, somebody, especially a congressman, publicly proclaiming you their adopted, air quotes, adopted son on Twitter to the entire globe is a pretty big deal and certainly life-changing. So we should absolutely see this reflected in the chart. I mean, that's just common sense, right? So when you're doing this, let me get rid of that. When you're doing this, the first thing we got to do is we have to ignore the moon, because we don't really know where the moon is. Because, sorry, my nose here, I was thinking. We don't really know where the moon is because we don't actually know what day he was born, right? We only know that it's a few days before the 18th. Now, the sun, because it's just close enough, right? The sun's not at the end of the sign. So the sun is more or less going to be there. Mercury, all the other planets are more or less going to be where they're at, give or take a degree or two here or there. Okay. And the further away from the sun you go, the further out you go, the more likely that planet is to be in that position by a couple of minutes or maybe a degree if you're a couple days off. So with that said, if we look at the 2020 or 2001 chart, there's nothing here. There's literally nothing here. I cannot find anything in this chart that connects to the June 18th, 2020 tweet. Nothing. There's nothing that connects the planets by transit to the natal chart. However, if we go to 2000, well, guess what? Everything lights up like a Christmas tree, because the 0-degree eclipse that May took and Matt took to their Mars, which rules young men, Nestor is also taking to his Mars, because if he was born in 2000, a couple of days before June 18th, his Mars is likely to be right there at 0 Cancer. And that Mercury station retrograde that we said showed up with May's Saturn and Matt's Saturn, and we were saying how it's karmic obligations and duties and responsibilities and all this sort of stuff, and how I think May had a lot to do with forcing Matt's hand on this. Well, that Mercury station retrograde 14 Cancer, it's right there on top of Nestor's Mercury. So we've got all kinds of chart connections for Nestor if we use the year 2000 birth date instead of 2001, which means that, of course, Matt is lying, no surprise there, and that Nestor was actually born in 2000, which means that May would have been 12 when she gave birth to him. Oh, yay. Alrighty, so again, really quick, days to watch for both of these two, because these dates are going to implicate both of them, or not implicate, but it certainly impact both of them. And we don't have long to wait to watch for this. The Uranus station on August 19th is going to blow up their charts. August is a big month for these two. So I'll be very interested to see what happens with them. Now, in October, May gets something of huge benefit to her, so she'll be very pleased or happy with what she gets. Matt, on the other hand, may have to make a couple of sacrifices or be inconvenienced in some way around this time. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out. So the two big months for the two of them as a pair or a couple, depending on how you want to look at it, will be August and October. So let's watch and wait and see. And if you enjoyed this, please give me some feedback by liking or disliking the video. Make sure you subscribe if you'd like to get notifications of future videos. And by all means, share with somebody you think might enjoy listening to this. Just do me a favor and don't share it with Matt, because I do not need the Secret Service showing up at my house because I accidentally opened up the right door to his closet of skeletons. And again, a reminder about the caveats here. One, we do not have a birth time for either Matt or Maisbel. With Matt, I am using a rectified time. So I could be, the houses could be off. All the planets are exactly where they need to be, but the houses may be a little bit off. With Maisbel, we have an unconfirmed birth time from public record from a traffic citation that's available online. And with Nestor, we're making some guesses here, some educated guesses. So we don't know when in June he was born. The announcement that he was born a few days earlier came on June 18th. So I'm using June 16th as a reference point. So we know Nestor was born anywhere around the 16th, before or shortly after. Now, Matt Gaetz is currently holding to the story that Nestor was born 2001. I think Matt's lying or he's confused, and I honestly believe that Nestor was born in 2000. But until we get some public record and confirmation, we don't know. So there's a lot of speculation about birth information here. Listen, this is my story based on my estimations and analysis of these charts, so I'm sticking to it. All right, well, and we'll see what happens. Remember, August and October are big, 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 huge months for Maisbel and Matt. So let's keep an eye out and see what happens for them then. All right, see you guys soon.